Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're decoding a language that moves trillions of dollars of goods around the world every single day. We're talking about Incoterms.
So let's jump right in and break down the essential rules that keep international commerce moving.
You know, in the world of global trade, this isn't just a hypothetical. It's a high-stakes question. And the entire answer, everything, comes down to just 3 little letters you agreed to in your sales contract. So let's figure out what they are.
To kick things off, we're going to look at the official rulebook that's been designed specifically to stop these kinds of expensive arguments before they even start.
Here's the game plan for today, and I want you to think of it like a global relay race. The goods? Well, that's the baton, and it's being passed from the seller to the buyer. We're going to follow that baton every step of the way.
So what are Incoterms really? Well, simply put, they're a universal language for traders everywhere. They're published by the International Chamber of Commerce, and they basically take all the guesswork out of who is supposed to do what, and crucially, when they're supposed to do it.
And it all boils down to these 3 things: risk, cost, and insurance. These are the absolute pillars of every single Incoterms rule. Who's on the hook if something goes wrong? Who's paying for the shipping? And who needs to get the insurance? Get this right, and you're golden.
Okay, let's get into the first leg of our relay race. This is where the seller hands off that baton super early, really close to home. With these rules, the buyer is doing most of the heavy lifting. Now take a look at this chart. See that yellow bar? That represents the seller's responsibility. For these first couple of rules, notice how short it is. That's because the rest of the journey, the long part, is almost entirely on the buyer.
So with EXW, or Xworks, the seller has minimal obligation. They just have to make the goods available at their own factory. That means the buyer is responsible for everything else, even loading the truck and handling export paperwork in a foreign country. Honestly, it's pretty risky for international trade. That's why FCA, or free carrier, is almost always the better, more modern choice. With FCA, the seller handles the export clearance and gets the goods to the buyer's carrier. Much more practical.
All right, on to the second leg of our race. Now this is where things can get a little tricky, because with the C rules, the seller arranges and pays for the main transport, but, and this is the key part, they hand off the risk much, much earlier. This is a super important distinction. And this chart just illustrates that point perfectly. This is the most misunderstood part of the C rules. See that green cost bar for the seller? It stretches way out because they're paying for the main journey. But look where the risk transfers, way back at the beginning. The buyer is actually bearing the risk for most of that trip.
Okay, let's make this real with an example. Imagine a German company sells a machine that's in Croatia to a buyer in China, and they use the rule CPT. The seller pays to ship that machine all the way to Shanghai. But the risk, that baton, is passed to the buyer as soon as the goods are loaded onto the ship in Trieste, Italy. So if that ship sinks in the middle of the ocean, it's the buyer's loss, even though the seller paid for the freight. Crazy, right?
And the big difference between all these C rules really comes down to one word: insurance. With CIP and CIF, the seller is required to buy insurance for the buyer's benefit. With CPT and CFR, they're not. So if you're a buyer using CPT or CFR, you absolutely have to get your own insurance. Oh, and a quick tip. A 2020 update means CIP now requires top-tier all-risk coverage, which is a big deal.
All right, we're on the final leg of the race. In this stage, the seller carries that baton almost all the way to the finish line. They hold on to most of the risk and the cost right up until the goods arrive in the buyer's country.
These are what we call the arrival rules, and you can see it right on the chart. That yellow bar showing the seller's responsibility, it stretches almost the entire way. The seller's job isn't done until the goods get to a specific, named place in the buyer's country.
Now, there are a few flavors here. The most extreme is DDP, Delivered Duty Paid. This is maximum obligation for the seller. They handle everything, including import customs and paying duties. But that's super risky if you don't know the rules in the buyer's country. More common is DAP, where the seller delivers, but the buyer handles the customs and unloading. And then there's DPU, a new rule from 2020. It's the only rule where the seller is responsible for unloading the goods.
Okay, so we've run through all these letters, E, F, C, D, but why does any of this really matter? Because picking the right 3 letters isn't just a detail, it's a major strategic decision that can affect your entire business.
Let's talk numbers. Back in 2018, logistics costs made up at least 9% of the GDP in industrialized countries. 9%! Your choice of Incoterm directly controls your slice of that huge pie. It's a lever you can pull to either save a ton of money or spend it.
And it goes way beyond just shipping costs.
This stuff can create massive tax headaches, especially with things like VAT. Tax authorities literally look at your Incoterm to figure out who owes tax and where, get it wrong, and you could be in for a nasty surprise.
Seriously, think about the ripple effect here. Your Incoterm choice, it's finance, tax, legal, even accounting. It dictates the exact moment you can legally recognize revenue, because revenue is tied to when risk transfers. This isn't just a decision for the shipping department. This is a C-suite level decision.
So the big question is, how do you choose the right rule for your next deal? Let's break down the key questions you should be asking, whether you're the buyer or the seller. If you're the seller, you're probably thinking, how do I get risk off my plate as fast as possible, right? So you need to ask yourself these questions. For example, can you realistically deal with import customs in a country you've never been to? Probably not. So that immediately rules out DDP. Now, let's flip it. If you're the buyer, you might want more control. Maybe you have a great relationship with a freight forwarder and you know you can get better rates. In that case, you might prefer an F rule like FCA so you can manage the shipping yourself and save some cash. Your answers to these questions point you to the perfect rule. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Look at your last big international deal. That 3-letter Incoterm, was it something you actively chose as a strategic tool? Or was it just some fine print that ended up being a costly oversight? Because Incoterms aren't an afterthought. They are a powerful tool you can use to manage risk, boost your bottom line, and make your business run better.